Great. So welcome to this AskTOM Office Hours session. Let's look at the workshop that we have. So I don't know if you know, but there is something called Oracle Live Labs. And if you go to Oracle Live Labs, you will have a lot of different workshops. So we see just 4 here, but I believe there is a lot more. Let's say, for example, what workshops do we have on 19C? Just these 4, well, or is it still? It's probably still loading here. So they are organized around different topics, like autonomous database. Okay, so you see there, it's always only showing. Oh, no, now it's showing a lot more. So you see there's like a bunch of different workshops, and I want to query this for JSON related things. So there are already some. Probably have to go back to the start page, look for JSON here. It's interesting. Why wouldn't it do that? Let me just start for it again. Maybe already applied a filter, JSON. And okay, so now it works. I'm not sure what I did differently this time, but I looked for JSON. And there are various workshops that are around JSON. Some are basically putting the emphasis on JSON. Some others may just use some JSON inside. So there's one new, for example, relational or JSON. There is like 19C JSON, and there's one that I want to present here a bit. This is one that presents the JSON capabilities as well as the SODA API. So this is kind of one workshop that allows you to learn the basic concepts around JSON to write applications. So not necessarily how to report or how to generate JSON. This is also covered in here, but also JSON as a data model for application development. And the nice part with this workshop is that you do not need to install anything. So you can get your always free, where you sign up with Oracle Cloud. That just requires like an email, I believe. It's not associated with any cost. And then you can use an always free database, and you can go through this workshop step by step. So it also gives an introduction to what's JSON. So if you're very new to JSON, or if you know someone who wants to learn about JSON, then this is really starting with the very basics. And at the end, we're going to learn how we store and query and process JSON data. We use the Autonomous JSON Database as the container or as the database to run it. But what you learn here can definitely be also applies for on-premise databases. So let's quickly go over it, and I'm not like boring you with a lot of details. So the first part is basically how you sign up for, or how you provision an autonomous JSON database. And I already I use my cloud account. Come on. All these things seem to time out. So let's just log in from scratch, view my account, sign into cloud, my account name, and then I'm signing in. And I'm actually using also my private email here, so I'm not making any use of being an employee of Oracle. So you see I'm using a free tier account. I don't want to operate to a paid account. And then if I click here on Oracle databases, so these are all these cloud services, and it's showing me these autonomous databases. And since I have an always free tier account, I can't have an autonomous data warehouse, but I can have an autonomous JSON database or an autonomous transaction processing database. So these are very, very similar. Actually, on the free tier, they could be considered the same, as both are free. But the moment you would go into production and you convert this into like a paid account, then autonomous JSON database is cheaper. Although it offers the same underlying technology and the same features, it's cheaper. How can this be? Well, it's tailored around JSON or primary as JSON data model. So if you go beyond 20 GB of relational data, then you would basically be asked to upgrade to a full autonomous transaction processing. So you can store a lot more than 20 GB of JSON data, but if you kind of use it as a relational database, then it's limited at 20 gig. So the free tier is 20 gig anyway, so I'm not using a paid account here. And in Always Free, I can have two databases. I have a 21C database, and this is, I forget to give it a real name, but if we look inside, we see that this is a 19C database. So this is what you would also do. And you can pick a 21C database if you want to try out some new features, or 19C database, because that's the one you have on premise, etc. For the workshop, it doesn't really make a big difference. You can choose either or. Exactly, good. And now what this workshop does, it introduces you to the concept of a collection. So most of you with an Oracle background have know how to deal with tables, and tables have columns of given data type. And the collection is just a different model where you say, I use JSON data as my persistent objects, and I store them in a collection, and the collection has a name. And again, these are all the steps. You have screenshots, you can copy paste. So I highly encourage you to walk through. At the end, the way it would look like, let me just close the window. You go on Tools, and you open these database actions. Database actions are basically different user interfaces. So I need to log in. So in that provisioning phase, it's asking you to provide a password for the admin user. Yeah, has to be uppercase. And now I'm logged in here. And there are different tiles depending on how you want to communicate with your database. So there is the SQL one to issue SQL queries. So I'm opening this here. So I suggest you right-click it. Then you can have these in separate windows. So I also do it with JSON. And this gives me the collection view over my JSON database. So I already created a collection products here. So I'm kind of in the middle of this workshop. Initially, you would not see a collection, but you could create a new collection. Let's say ABC. So it's basically just a name. And then you see I have an empty collection in here. And you could just insert data. So normally, I mean, this is a user interface. Normally, you would issue all these collections commands from a programming language like Python or Node.js, Java. There are create collection statements, or insert something in a collection, or find something in a collection. But I wanted to keep this really independent of any programming language, or you don't have to install anything. This is why we use this UI, which is independent of any driver, and you don't have to install anything. So here I want to insert a document. So let's say I insert a document, and I say, well, I have a name is Peter, and let's say Peter is 3. So I create this this object here, and I'm just saving it. So now I see the content of my collection, which is just one document. And let's just quickly do another one. There is Pierre, and Pierre is 4. Even not 5.
Yeah, but so,
Sorry for that. That was my daughter. So now I have 2 records, and I can now filter these. And the way I filter it is by entering these query expressions here. So this is now basically an empty object, which means select everything. But I could say, well, I want to find out all the people who are 3. So I run this query, and I only select this. So I'm not, I told you I wouldn't go through this entire workshop. There's way more fancy constructs you could use to query the data. And this is here, like insert, find. I'm also doing a bit on constraints. So there is an example where we say, hey, we are adding products, and products have an ID, and I'm looking up products very often by the ID, and I want to make sure the ID is unique. And the ID is a numeric value. And we solve this in this workshop by basically issuing and create index statements. So we use the SQL access to the same data. So I told you that we have this JSON view where we see our, it was this one, we see our JSON view. So for example, here on our products, this is the, this is now filled with products, a collection with movies and books, etc. But I can also query the same data just using SQL. So if I reload this, actually I'm showing all the tables. Now you see the collection ABC we've just created. This is also a table. So now I could, for example, say describe ABC. And we would see that the collection ABC is also a table ABC where we store our JSON data in a blob column, like in a binary format. There's an ID associated with it, some creation data, and I could just say select. I'm using JSON serialize here to convert the binary JSON representation back into a string. So if I just say JSON serialize, JSON document ABC, then I get back the values as JSON strings. And this is not like a collection call. This is just a regular SQL call. Or what I could also do, I could say, I'm saying abc.json document.h. So I'm pulling out a value from the JSON and the name. And this way I can use SQL to query my data. So this is also explained in the later part of this workshop, but I wanted to quickly go back on this index creation. So here we used the SQL interface to create an index, but very recently we added a new API here. This was not there last week when we demoed it. So you can right click on your collection. So let's look at our ABC collections, and I say, hey, I want to create an index. And so there are no indexes defined. So I'm clicking on plus here, and it now wants to know what fields to index. And I can basically sample the document if I put a star in here. And this will actually go through my collection data and build something what we call a JSON data guide. So this is a summary of all the field names and the data types that occur. So let's say I wanted to add an index on the H field. So this is the default view where I just see the path to the value. So $.h is the document, .h means go to the H field. If I move this to advanced, I can actually even see what the data types are. So I see that age is a number in my JSON, and I want to index it also as a number to basically get proper ordering, greater, smaller. Sometimes you have data where numeric values are expressed as a string. So it would say the JSON type is a string, or here it says varchar, but you would want to index as a number. So these things can be chosen differently. So one could say, well, why does it open it? It should open it. So let's go back. Yeah, anyways, this is a drag down list, and you should be able to make a change here. Interesting. Well, it used to work. Maybe there's something with my browser. Okay, so this is the advanced mode, which allows you to index fields with a different data type. Then you can also say you wanted a unique index, etc. You give it a name. Probably putting a unique index on the age is not a smart idea, so we would create it. And then we see the index got created. Here, this is actually a functional index. Here I see the actual representation of this index as JSON. So this is under the cover using the SODA API. SODA stands for Simple Order Document Access. This is the API we're using here to insert data. And this is the index specification as a JSON document. Okay, so give this a try. This is really new thing. And the We do a little bit of REST in this workshop, and the primary reason is to do a bulk insert using REST. So we pull some data from the object store, and then we use a REST command to upload it. This is how we get all this movie data in. So there's like a couple dozen or so movies, and they are getting inserted through REST. And the last part is then really on the reporting end and on the SQL side of things, where we say, hey, how can I query my data? How can I extract values? Also doing on updates and on how to generate new JSON data. So overall, I mean, we could look at an example here. Actually, let's look at the JSON generation queries. One interesting part. Right, so this is where we run like reports. I wanted to quickly go right. So let's say, let's just quickly run this query. So I'm going to this SQL developer web view where I use SQL. And what I do is, let's quickly go back to one of this data set. So in my collection, I have a product, and these products could be movies. So here we have a movie La La Land, and I have some properties, like what's the format. And there's one nested array about the actors that play in this movie. So we basically have a bunch of movies, and each pointing to a list of actors. And the purpose is to basically invert it. Maybe we realize we want to present a list of actors that point to the movie, so kind of point the data on the head. So, and we use SQL for this. The first thing is to just unnest the information, basically bring it in the relational format. So we query our products table, and we walk to our JSON document, and then we list all the columns that are inside the JSON document that we are interested in. So we want to extract the ID, the product ID is a number, the title, I don't have to specify the data type for title, it's using varchar as a default. And then I am nesting, or I am iterating over my nested array. So I'm saying nested, it's again this nested clause recursively being used. I already had it here where I basically went to my document. Now I went to like a nested structure, and this is this array called starring, and the square bracket star means iterate over it and extract me a new column called actor, and the path to access the value for actor is the current element itself. So if we quickly go back, we see that starring, this is the array, and inside the array, we don't have any objects or any nested structures, but instead we just have like strings. So every value in the array is a string. And this is what we're saying here, like the path is just the value itself. So no further dotting into nested structures because there is none, and just name that value with a column name actor. And now you see the result is we have a column name actor. You see all the actor names. And outside of the actor here, the ID and the title, those get repeated for every movie. So this way I can get I call it like a mapping table between a movie title and the actors. It's now totally flattened, and we make use of that in the with clause. So I take now this query. So this is really just this query, and I move it into the with clause. So I said like, this is an inline subquery. I call this inline subquery order title map because it maps the title to the author. So this is the exact same query. But what I then add is I don't just select from this title map. I also do a distinct, and this would give me the distinct. Actually, maybe that's two. Let's do like the previous step. That's fine. So let's just do star here. Okay. Oh, this was not. So here, this is what let's just do star, and then we see the result. This is just the exact same. And what I can then do is I can say distinct actor, then I just get every actor name once from this. So I'm basically just using the actor name from this title map, and then I have all my distinct actors. I could do this more easily without this with clause, but we want to build on top of this with clause. And what we add is we add a JSON generation function here. So let's say where it is not null, comma. Okay, so let's just quickly run it to make sure I combined it correctly. So let me just quickly walk you. This is our with clause, just to extract or to create the mapping between authors and titles. Here we get the distinct authors. And I also name this. This is also now an inline subquery, which I call distinct authors. And then in the last path, or in the last part, I generate a new JSON object, which is the actor's name. And so you see here, actor Tim Robbins, actor Robert De Niro, and we will only have one actor name occur once here because we use the distinct operation here. So then we can make sure that every actor only occurs once. And then we say, well, there's another field called movies, and the corresponding value of the movies, that's an array that we're building by joining our actor's title map. This was the first part, which also has the title information, and we extract the title here. And this is how you get the representation where movies has now the list of all title names. So this is just a very quick overview of this lab that not only explains you how to work with JSON or what JSON is, but also how to work with it using these collections, the SODA or document store API, and then also gives you a good understanding of what SQL operations are possible. So with this workshop, you kind of get a good tour around all capabilities that exist. Right, and then there are other workshops, and we keep adding workshops to this live lab. So if you search for other things here, you may see other interesting things. But this is a workshop we created for people who want to just get familiar with what's possible with JSON in Oracle. And we use Autonomous JSON as a easy to consume container, so you don't have to install anything, but everything you learn here you could also do on premise. And with this, I'm just checking on any questions here. So any Oracle application completely run on, is this a question like if there are any existing applications that's run on JSON database? Yes, there are. It's, as I said, JSON database is pretty much like an autonomous transaction processing. So it's the Oracle database in the cloud for operational workloads. And if people primarily or only use JSON, then they have a huge incentive to do this on Autonomous JSON database. We do have a couple use cases, companies that use it. We're also working on some public reference. I believe we have a couple. There are also some migration stories here where people migrated from some NoSQL databases like MongoDB, for example, to use Autonomous JSON for various reasons. Sometimes it's features where people said, hey, I really want to do powerful reporting, or I want to do like a lot of transactions across collections. Sometimes it's even performance. So this Autonomous JSON database, I mean, as autonomous transaction scales very well. So yes, definitely there is pickup. Good. Any more questions? And you can ask me anything, JSON. It doesn't have to be related to this workshop, really. So if there is something you always wanted to know, or other use cases, etc. Oh, there's Q&A is also here. Okay. In terms of converged database, how would I talk between a JSON database and a transaction database? So I'm not very familiar with the term transaction database. Maybe you could write that in the chat or in another question. I mean, this is Oracle database. So you have full transaction support. So if you write not if you come from REST, because REST is basically auto commit, but if you, for example, write a Java program that connects or that makes use of JSON, you can do transactions across collections. You have rollback, you have commits, etc. So it's fully transactional. And JSON is basically just the payload. So it doesn't behave any different than if you work like with regular tables of numbers and strings. It's just that now one of your columns holds JSON. So this is, if we go back here, every of these collections is actually a table, and it has some normal columns, and one of these columns is a column that holds the JSON. And the collection mechanism just makes it easier for you to create that table because it has this fixed system defined shape. If you wanted, you could create an own table like my products to whatever that has additional fields. So yes, it is still the same relational database. So nothing really changes there from a transactional point of view. In future, does Oracle intend to add JSON as column data type? Well, we already did. This is in 21C. So let's go back here. And I've shown you that I have two databases. And I believe I picked the 19C, but let's say I go to my 21C database. And I open the database actions there. And with Always Free, you can get two databases. So this is what I used, 21C and 19C. Let's log in. And I'm now closing these windows here. Otherwise I get confused with what's 19C, what's 21C. And let's do the same here, JSON workshop. And I believe, I also have the products collection here. So let's go back to SQL developers, search the tables, and it says products. But now if we say describe products, then we actually see here that this has a JSON data type. So this is something we added in release 21C, a new SQL data type JSON. We also want to add it to the SQL standard. So it's that's not only like a proprietary extension, but that the SQL standard benefits from it. And yes, this is a new SQL data type. If you want to make use of it in JDBC, you would also use a 21C JDBC driver that understands what JSON is, and you could bind values to JSON. Under the cover, the way we store it in 19C, it said it's a blob. The bytes on disks it's both a binary format, meaning we're not storing it as a text that needs to be parsed, but in a binary representation. We call it OSIN, and it's very fast for queries and also very update friendly because you don't have to replace all your bytes if you just changed like the last name of a person. Good. So the column data type is definitely there. Why do I have to choose JSON database as opposed to ATP? Also an excellent question. You don't have to choose it. Like you could do everything on ATP. So let's say if we go back to autonomous databases and we say, let's say create an autonomous database, then you click here on JSON to get autonomous JSON, or you click here on transaction processing and you would get what we call ATP. So this is ATP, this is AJD. The lab would work exactly the same. It is just that if you would get a paid account. So here you see I have an Always Free, so I can only have I cannot have 3 Always Free databases, just 2. So I would have to upgrade this account, then I would have to start paying. And this is where it gets interesting, because from a financial point of view, the JSON one is much cheaper than the transaction processing. So you basically get JSON for, I believe, 25% of the cost or 75% discount. But with the limit in mind that only 20 GB of non-JSON data. So you can't use this as like a backdoor for your relational use case. If you have a primarily relational use case, you use ATP or the warehouse. If it's JSON, you use the Autonomous JSON database, you can still run SQL queries, you can still store some relational data. 20 gigabyte is actually quite a bit, and you get it cheaper here. Good, so let's have answered. Also JSON data type. One question on JSON feature availability. JSON columns and tables are available only from 12.1 and 4. Yes. So JSON's been around. Let me see if let me quickly pull up one slide here. I'm stop sharing and I'm back in a second with this slide. I hope it was in this deck here. Yes, here it is. So let me share this slide with you. Let's make it a little bigger. So this is our current release. So you see it starts in 2016, and we actually added JSON data type much earlier in release 12.1. I'd still recommend, like, the earliest version should be a 12.2 with a decent patch set. So we provide these patches and bugs get fixed and performance improvements. Some of them get backported. So you're always better off with a newer database. So ideally you would be on an Oracle 19c or 21c on premise. I believe it's just around the corner. In the cloud, you can already use it in always free tier. 12.1, we have some very large customers on 12.1. So absolutely, one of our largest customers started very early and they use 12.1. Totally doable, but there are some limits. Not all the features are there. For example, data guide got added later. JSON generation, returning lobs was added later. So you're much better off on a 12.2 or on a 19, or in the future on a 21c. The difference between 19c and 21c is also the support model. So 19c is what's called an extended release or a long-term release, meaning you get support for many years. So a lot of customers are upgrading now from 12.2 to 19, and they plan on to write this out many years into the future, meaning on 19c you wouldn't get JSON data type that you would get on 21c, but 21c won't be supported that long. It's not a long-term release. Instead, it's an innovation release. So this is some things to consider. If you are on premise, should you use 19c for JSON, or does it make sense to also run like a 21c version for some projects that could benefit from JSON type? Also, there is a multi-value index in 21c. I don't have a slide on this, but it's basically making it easier to index values from an array. So there are some true benefits of 21c to be used, but then you have to be prepared to kind of upgrade then to, I don't know, 23c, which could be another long-term release. Good. So we've answered this. Yes, so I could confirm this with the release 12.1. Yeah, there's still this question I answered live on this transaction database. I'm not sure if I answered this correctly. Otherwise, just put more questions in there. Yeah, any more questions from your side? Stuff that you were interested in, that you want to see? Okay, let me look at the chat here. Can we use JSON with RDMS? Absolutely, yes. So this is a question that was in the chat. What I have shown here, let me show this back just to make sure everyone understands it. So here, this is all the Oracle database, just different flavors. So basically, data warehouse is more optimized for analytical queries, and transaction processing and JSON more for operational things, like where you have concurrent, inserts, update, queries, etc. So this is the Oracle database. Even this here, this is just a collection view on top of Oracle database. So if you have Oracle database, you can use all this as well. So here, if you use Autonomous JSON Database or Autonomous Transaction Processing, the SODA driver is already installed, so you can immediately make use of SODA. If you use an on-premise database, then you likely have to, or then you have to install SODA. Let's see, Oracle Document Store right here. Exactly. So this is the introduction on SODA, and it has basically different implementation. Let's say you wanted to use it for Java, for example, then you have to get I think it's a soda.jar file, and this gives you now the ability to do these document store operations directly. So you create your regular connection to Oracle database, your JDBC connection, and then with SODA you can run these puts and gets and inserts. With other implementations like Node or Python, you need the CX Oracle driver. So it's also described here really depending on which language you use. And if you want to use REST, that uses Oracle REST data services. So you would have to install what we call ORDs. But all that is, let me just put this in the chat for people that are interested in this. Can look it up there.